The room smelled of cheap perfume and stale Tsingtao beer. It was a smell Shi Young had known her whole life, the cloying sweetness of desperation. Here, in the heart of a floating brothel on the Pearl River, a woman's body wasn't her own. It was a commodity, a flickering candle to be used and snuffed out. Men's laughter, thick and greasy, echoed off the thin wooden walls of her tiny chamber. She traced the carved phoenix on her lacquered comb, its wings spread in flight. A bird, trapped in a wooden cage, just like her. But this wasn't any night. This wasn't another fat merchant with sweat-stained silks and fumbling hands. The man who had bought her time tonight was different. His name was Zheng Yi, and he didn't smell of money. He smelled of salt, gunpowder, and something else, ambition. He was the commander of the Red Flag Fleet, a pirate with a king's reputation. His knuckles were scarred, his eyes held the glint of stolen gold. But when he looked at her, he wasn't just looking at her body. He was looking at her mind. He saw the way she watched the other girls, the way she tracked the flow of silver, the way she subtly played the brothel's madam against the local triad bosses. He saw a strategist trapped behind a painted face. "They say you are the most beautiful flower in Canton," Zheng Yi said, his voice a low rumble like distant thunder. Shi Yang didn't smile. She met his gaze in the dim lantern light. "Flowers wilt," she replied, her voice steady, betraying nothing. "Mountains endure." He laughed, a sharp, appreciative bark. He hadn't come for a flower. He'd come for a mountain. He wasn't offering a night of pleasure. He was offering a partnership, a marriage. A chance to trade her silk prison for a wooden throne on the open sea. But it came with a contract colder than any banker's ledger. She would get 50% share in the command of his entire fleet. An equal partner. It was an insane proposal. A woman? An equal? Unheard of. But here's what Zheng Yi didn't fully grasp. He thought he was buying a brilliant advisor, a beautiful queen to adorn his pirate kingdom. He had no idea he was handing the keys to the empire to the woman who would burn it all down to build her own. She was trading one cage for a much, much larger one. But this time, she'd be the one holding the lock. Her entire life had been about losing control. Now, she would dedicate every waking moment to seizing it. It was more than a goal. It was a vow. Control. That night, she said yes. She walked out of the brothel, leaving the scent of stale beer and wilted flowers behind forever. The salt spray on the deck of Zheng Yi's flagship felt like a baptism. For 6 years, they were unstoppable. They grew the Red Flag Fleet from 200 ships to over 600. They weren't just pirates. They were a government on the water, with taxes, territories, and laws. She was no longer Shi Yang, the prostitute. She was Zheng Yi Sao, wife of Zheng Yi. She was respected. She was feared. She was for the first time in control. Then came the storm. It wasn't a typhoon of wind and water. It was a typhoon of fate. Zheng Yi, the mighty commander, the terror of the South China Sea, was swept overboard in a sudden gale. Just like that. No glorious battle, no dramatic last stand. One moment he was there, a giant silhouetted against the lightning-cracked sky. The next he was gone, swallowed by the black, churning waves. An absurd, pathetic end for a man who lived a life of thunder. The news ripped through the fleet like a cannonball. The captains, vultures in pirate silks, began to circle. They saw a widow, a pretty figurehead whose power had just been washed out to sea with her husband. They saw a vacuum, an opportunity. Her carefully constructed world, her newfound control, was about to shatter into a million pieces. She stood on the deck, the cold rain plastering her face to the face, the fleet's 1,000 lanterns blurring in the mist. They thought she was just a wife. They were about to learn she was an empress. What happens when you take everything from a woman who has nothing left to lose but her ambition? Desperation has a taste. It tastes like rust and brine. In the days after Jing Yi's death, that taste was in every gulp of air Jing Yi Sao breathed. The whispers started immediately, slithering through the fleet like sea snakes. A woman cannot lead. The fleet needs a strong hand, a man's hand. The other pirate confederations, the Black Flag, the White Flag, smelled weakness. They began raiding her territory, testing her borders, picking at the edges of her empire like sharks tearing at a whale carcass. Her control was slipping. Sha Li Ban Chuan Guo Ta Da Ju Jian, like sand through her fingers. She had to act, not with reason, not with diplomacy, but with a move so audacious, so utterly unthinkable, it would stun them all into silence. Her eyes fell on Chang Pao. He was her adopted son, taken in by Jing Yi years ago, a handsome, fearsome warrior who had risen to command his own squadron. He was fiercely loyal to Jing Yi, but what about to her? He was the most powerful man left in the fleet. The captains respected him, feared him even. He could be her greatest ally, or the dagger that finally slit her throat. She saw the calculations in his eyes, the ambition he tried so hard to hide. She summoned him to her cabin. The air was thick with the scent of sandalwood incense and unspoken tension. The ship groaned around them, a wounded beast. She didn't offer him power. She didn't ask for his loyalty. She made him a proposition that shattered every taboo. She offered herself. She would make him her lover, her second in command, her consort. They would rule together, their power intertwined. It was a shocking, incestuous gambit that would either unify the fleet behind a new power couple or tear it apart in disgust. Chang Pao stared at her, his warrior's face unreadable. He could have taken everything, declared himself the new commander, and had her thrown overboard. Instead, he knelt. He took her hand, the hand of his adopted mother, and kissed it. "My commander," he said. The first twist of the knife was complete. She had secured her power not by becoming a man, but by using her womanhood as a weapon more potent than any cannon. With Chang Pao at her side, she didn't just maintain control, she tightened it into a fist of iron. She drafted a code of law so brutal, it made the old pirate rules look like children's games. Any pirate giving an order on their own or disobeying a superior's, beheaded. On the spot. Stealing from the common treasury or any villager who supplied them, beheaded. A pirate who went ashore without permission, his ears were pierced and he was paraded in shame. If he did it again, beheaded. And the laws for female captives were the most shocking of all. Rape was strictly prohibited. The punishment? Death. Any consensual sex required the pirate to take the woman as his wife and be faithful. The punishment for infidelity? Death. She who had been treated as property now decreed that no woman under her flag would suffer the same fate. It was a bizarre, ruthless form of justice enforced with the swing of a bloody sword. One of her captains, a grizzled veteran named Guo Po Dai, commander of the Black Flag Fleet and a powerful rival, openly mocked her laws. "She bleeds the fun out of piracy," he sneered to his men, loud enough for her spies to hear. He thought her alliance with Chang Pao was a weakness, a sign of feminine frailty. He saw her laws not as a tool for discipline, but a woman's foolish attempt to civilize the untamable. She received the report from a spy, a young boy whose family Guo had personally executed years prior. The boy's story was a quiet, chilling mini-narrative of brutality, ending with a whispered plea for vengeance. Jing Yi Sao saw her chance. She called a council of all fleet commanders on her flagship, a colossal war junk named the Scourge of the Heavens. The deck was packed with hundreds of the deadliest men in China. The air stunk of sweat, cheap wine, and simmering violence. Guo Po Dai was standing there, arrogant, a smirk on his face. He expected a debate, a shouting match. Jing Yi Sao, dressed in blood-red silks, didn't say a word. She simply nodded to Chang Pao. Before Guo could even draw his weapon, two of Chang Pao's loyalists seized him. They dragged him to the center of the deck. He screamed curses, threats, promises of rebellion. Jing Yi Sa watched, her face a mask of ice. "The law is the law," she said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Disobedience is death. This is the price of order. This is the price of control." The executioner's sword flashed in the midday sun. A sickening thud echoed across the deck. Guo's head rolled to a stop at the feet of another trembling captain. Blood, black in the harsh light, soaked into the thirsty wood. The fleet was silent. The challenge to her authority was over. She stood over the bodies, the coppery smell of death filling her lungs. Victory felt cold, empty. The captains who had been plotting against her were now on their knees, swearing fealty. But as she looked at their terrified faces, a horrifying realization settled in her gut. She hadn't just defeated an enemy. She had destroyed her own world. The emperor was furious. A woman, a former prostitute, was strangling the richest trade routes in his celestial empire. She wasn't just a pirate, she was a personal insult. He had dispatched fleet after fleet, and each one had been sent back, shattered and burning, or worse, absorbed into her ever-growing navy. By 1809, her Red Flag fleet had swelled to an astonishing size, over 1,800 ships and nearly 80,000 pirates. It wasn't a fleet anymore. It was a nation at sea. He had had enough. He appointed a new admiral, a famously relentless commander named Kuo Long, and gave him one order: annihilate Zhang Yi Sao. All of her. Burn her ships, salt the sea where she sailed, and bring him her head in a box. Kuo Long was no fool. He gathered the largest imperial fleet ever assembled and devised a cunning plan. He wouldn't fight her on the open sea, where she was the undisputed master. He would trap her. He chased her fleet for weeks, using smaller, faster ships to harry her flanks, pushing and prodding, guiding her exactly where he wanted her, into the narrow, winding inlet of Tung Chung Bay near Lantau Island. It was a perfect bottleneck, a tomb. Zhang Yisao saw the trap closing. Her captains panicked. They were sailors, not siege engineers. They were surrounded by hills bristling with imperial cannons and a harbor mouth choked with Kuo Long's heaviest war junks. There was no escape. For 9 days, the siege held. Food and fresh water ran low. The smell of fear was thick enough to choke on. The relentless drumming of the imperial fleet echoed day and night, a funeral dirge for their pirate nation. Kuo Long sent a messenger with terms, unconditional surrender. All pirates would be executed. He would be merciful with her and allow her a quick death by poison. On the 9th night, under the sliver of a new moon, Zhang Yisao called her council. They begged her to surrender, to negotiate, to run, to try and break the blockade. She listened, her face impassive. Then she smiled, a cold, terrifying smile that did not reach her eyes. He thinks he has trapped a tiger. He does not realize he has trapped the sea itself. She revealed her gambit. It wasn't just ruthless, it was insane. They weren't going to break the blockade, they were going to drown it. Her plan was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. First, she sent a small, ramshackle boat to Kuo Long's flagship, seemingly with a message of surrender. It was a distraction. As the imperial officers gloated, her real attack began. Under the cover of darkness, she launched a wave of fire ships, small junks packed with gunpowder and oil. But she didn't aim them at the enemy fleet. That was what they expected. Instead, she sent them directly towards the shore, towards the Imperial Army's own land-based cannons and supply depots. Chaos erupted. The hillsides lit up in orange and red, soldiers screaming, cannons exploding in their own emplacements. With Kuo Long's attention diverted, she unleashed the second, most unexpected part of her plan. She had her largest, heaviest war junks, their hulls reinforced for battle, sail at full speed directly at her own blockade, not at the gaps, at the strongest ships. It was a suicidal, head-on charge. The Imperial fleet, thinking she was making a desperate, foolish final run, tightened their formation to meet her. They were packed together, bow to stern. And that's when the third wave hit. From a hidden cove, Chang Pao emerged with a reserve fleet of smaller, faster ships. They didn't engage the warships. They went for the rudders and sails, disabling the massive imperial junks, turning them into helpless, floating fortresses. At the same time, Zhang Yisao gave the signal. Her massive, heaviest ships, at the very last second, dropped their main anchors. The colossal chains screamed as they bit into the seabed, and the ships lurched to a violent, shuddering halt just meters from the imperial line. Kuo Long had trapped her in a bay. She had now trapped him in a pincer movement from hell. With burning chaos on one side and an immovable wall of pirate steel on the other. He had made the bay a cage, and she had just slammed the door shut on him. She had absolute control. The battle was a slaughter. Trapped and unable to maneuver, The imperial fleet was decimated by cannon fire at point-blank range. Wood splintered, masts cracked, and the bay turned red. By dawn, what was left of Kuo Long's Grand Armada was a floating scrapyard of smoldering wreckage and dead men. Kuo Long himself, seeing the utter totality of his defeat, committed suicide on the deck of his flagship rather than face the emperor's wrath. Zhang Yisao stood on her quarterdeck, the rising sun casting a golden glow on the carnage. The air was thick with smoke and the screams of dying men. Her fleet was battered, her losses were heavy, but she had won. She had faced the full might of the Chinese Empire and had broken it over her knee. It was a victory so total, so absolute, it sent a shockwave to the Forbidden City. She hadn't just defeated an admiral, she had defeated the idea of imperial power itself. They called her the Terror of South China. She looked at the blood on her hands, at the burning ships that littered the horizon, and knew she'd become the monster they always said she was. The victory at Tongcheng Bay left a silence that was louder than any cannon. The emperor was broken, the treasury was empty, the imperial navy was a ghost. There was no one left to fight her. Zheng Yisao was the undisputed, undefeated ruler of the South China Sea. She could have blockaded Beijing. She could have declared herself empress of a new dynasty. She could have drowned the world in blood. And then she did the most unexpected thing of all. She quit. At the absolute zenith of her power, she chose to negotiate. It was the ultimate twist, a gambit so counterintuitive her own captains thought she was mad. "We won," Chang Pao roared, his hands clenched into fists. "Why talk to the dogs we have beaten?" She replied, her voice quiet, "Because a dog with nothing to lose will still bite, and I am tired of bleeding." The ruthlessness that had forged her empire was gone, replaced by a haunting, pragmatic weariness. She understood the nature of power better than any of them. Winning forever was impossible. The war had to end, but it would end on her terms. The final, greatest act of control. She sent a message to the Governor-General of Canton, a man named Zhang Beiling. She would come to him, unarmed, to discuss a pardon. It was an incredible risk. They could have seized her, tortured her, executed her on the spot. The meeting was a legend in itself. Zheng Yisao, the demon queen of the pirates, walked into the Governor-General's office, not in armor, but in fine silks. She brought with her a retinue of 17 women and children. It was a gesture of peace, but also a subtle power play. "I'm so confident, I don't even need guards." The negotiations were a battle of wills more intense than any naval engagement. Zhang Beiling offered the standard pirate amnesty: surrender your ships and weapons, and your men can go free, but the leaders will be punished. Zheng Yisao laughed. She made her demands: a full pardon for every single one of her pirates. They would be allowed to join the imperial bureaucracy or military if they chose. And the most audacious demand of all: she would keep all the wealth she had accumulated. She would not surrender her loot. The government would in effect be paying her to stop pirating them. Zhang Beiling was apoplectic. It was madness. But his position was weak, and she knew it. The final sticking point was a matter of pride. He insisted that to show submission, she and Chang Pao must kneel before him. Here, she played her final human card. She knew the law. She knew tradition. She looked the Governor-General in the eye and said it was impossible for her to kneel. Chang Pao was her consort, but he was also her adopted son. To kneel together would be a violation of patriarchal custom. However, if the emperor would graciously allow them to be formally married, then Chang Pao, as her official husband, could kneel on behalf of them both. It was brilliant. She used the very system that had oppressed her as a woman to win her final victory. She forced the government to officially sanction her taboo relationship, legitimize her command, and surrendered to her terms, all while appearing to follow their traditions. Zhang Beiling, exhausted and outmaneuvered, agreed. The ceremony was surreal. The most feared pirate in history was officially married to her lover by the man who had been sent to destroy her. She walked out of that office a free woman, a wealthy woman, a noble woman. Her later years were a quiet epilogue to a violent saga. She settled in Canton, the city where she was once sold like property, and with the immense fortune she kept, she opened a gambling house, a casino. The woman who had gambled with empires now spent her days watching men gamble away their silver. Sometimes on quiet nights, with the clatter of dice in the background and the smell of opium in the air, old pirates would visit her. They would tell stories of the glory days, of the smell of gunpowder on the wind. She would just nod, her face a web of fine lines, her eyes holding secrets the sea would never give up. Did she miss it? The power, the fear, the control? Or was she haunted by the ghosts of the thousands who had died by her command? History remembers the empires of men, the emperors on their dragon thrones. She remembered the feeling of cheap silk in a floating brothel. She remembered the splintered wood of a ship's deck beneath her bare feet. She remembered the weight of a severed head. She died peacefully in her bed at the age of 69, a prostitute who became a pirate who became a commander, and a commander who became a legend by knowing exactly when to walk away. She didn't just break their laws, she rewrote the rules of power itself.